Is it possible to survive 43 days in one of the world's most unforgiving deserts without food, water, or equipment? This story is not about a plane crash or a tragic mistake. It is the story of a man who entered Australia's Great Sandy Desert of his own free will, seeking answers to his questions, but instead found himself in a 43-day struggle for survival. This is a real-life survival diary that pushes the limits of human endurance. Watch the video to the end to find out how a former firefighter managed to survive where experts guaranteed death, and why the rescuers searching for him at one point believed he was avoiding them. I will reveal the best-kept secret of this story. It was not an accident or a tragic mistake. Robert Bogucki, a former firefighter from Alaska, was a man accustomed to hardship and harsh conditions. However, in 1998, he was not looking for physical challenges, but spiritual insight. He felt an inner emptiness and believed that he could only find answers by placing himself in extreme isolation. His goal was not just a trip, but a true pilgrimage. He did not choose Australia by chance. The Great Sandy Desert and the Gibson Desert are among the most sparsely populated and arid regions on the planet. This place, where nature does not forgive mistakes, seemed ideal to him for testing his spirit. He wanted to repeat the experience of ancient mystics and prophets who went into the desert to fast and communicate with higher powers. This motive makes his story absolutely unique. Bogucki was not a victim of circumstances. He created those circumstances himself. He consciously took a risk that any sane person would consider suicidal. His plan was simple: ride his bike as far as he could, then walk, relying on fate and the meager survival skills he possessed. He was not completely naive, but his preparation was extremely inadequate for such an undertaking. He took with him a small supply of protein powder, some cookies, and basic camping equipment. He had no reliable map, no compass, and, most importantly, no water purification system or sufficient water supply. He believed he would find everything he needed along the way. He only gave his friends and family a general outline of his plan, describing it as a long bike trip off the beaten track. No one realized the true scale of his plan. He didn't want anyone to dissuade him or try to stop him. His decision was final and irrevocable, based on a deep inner need. This first step into the unknown was not just the beginning of an adventure, it was a conscious rejection of the rules of civilization. He was conducting an experiment on his own body and mind. He wanted to find out what would remain of a person when absolutely everything was taken away from them. He had no idea how harsh this experiment would be. The desert is not just an absence of people, it is an active environment that sucks the life out of everything. His spiritual quest would very quickly turn into a primitive, daily struggle for the next sip of water. Robert Bogucki was driven by faith, but the desert did not care about his motives. It greeted him with silence, heat, and complete indifference. He was alone with the continent, and he had almost no chance. This story makes you think about the fine line between faith and recklessness. Is such an act a manifestation of incredible spiritual strength, or a tragic mistake of a presumptuous person? He sought enlightenment, but found only thirst and despair. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about this motivation for extreme survival? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other incredible stories about the price of victory. Are you ready to learn the truth about how this 43-day nightmare began in August 1998? It all started with a long journey. Robert Bogucki drove his pickup truck to the end of the last dirt road on the border between the Gibson and Great Sand Deserts. This was where civilization ended and thousands of square kilometers of scorched earth began. He unloaded his mountain bike from the bed of the truck, which would be his only means of transportation. After loading his meager supplies onto the bike and into his backpack, he took a last sip of clean water from a canister and looked at the track disappearing into the distance. This moment was the point of no return. He got on his bike and began to pedal, riding further and further away from safety and the familiar world. His supplies were calculated to last, at best, a week of modest existence. The first few days were incredibly difficult. Riding a bike on soft sand in rocky terrain is exhausting work. The sun beat down mercilessly, and every kilometer was a huge effort. He quickly realized that he would not get very far on his bike, as he was using up too much precious energy and water. After a few days of travel, he made a decision that finally cut off his way back. He abandoned his bike. This two-wheeled vehicle was his last connection to the world of technology, his only means of rapid transportation. Leaving it in the middle of the desert, he turned from a traveler into a pedestrian. Now he walked, carrying a backpack that grew lighter every day as his food supplies dwindled. He moved deeper into the desert, guided by the sun, without a clear road. His goal was not a point on the map, but the very state of being lost. The desert greeted him with deafening silence. During the day, the temperature rose to extreme levels, forcing him to seek the slightest shade under the stunted acacia bushes. At night, the temperature dropped sharply, and the cold penetrated to his bones. This sharp contrast exhausted his body no less than the daytime heat. The food supplies he had taken with him were eaten in the first week. The protein powder ran out, and the cookies turned to crumbs. Now he was alone with nature, which seemed to offer nothing edible. Real hunger set in, accompanied by constant, agonizing thirst. He quickly realized that his life now depended on one thing alone: his ability to find water. His entire spiritual mission was reduced to one simple, animalistic task: to find the next source of moisture. Without water in this desert, a person could not survive even 3 days. He began his long journey on foot, which would last for many weeks. His body was still strong, but the desert had already begun its slow work of draining his strength. He did not yet know that this was only the beginning, and that 43 days of trials lay ahead of him. His supplies were calculated to last a week. But how does a person survive when that week ends, and there is nothing for thousands of kilometers around? In the next chapter, we will learn how the body works on the brink and how Robert faced his main dilemma. Was he a pilgrim at that moment, or just a victim? What I am about to reveal breaks all stereotypes about survival, because in the first weeks of his ordeal, Robert Bogucki did not seek rescue. This unique detail sets his story apart from all others. When the first search planes were probably already flying overhead, he was likely even hiding. He was deeply immersed in his mission, and meeting people would have meant its failure. He perceived hunger and thirst not as a threat, but as part of purification. His body was weakening, but he believed that his spirit was growing stronger. He wanted to reach the point where the physical self gives way to something greater. This phase of his journey was a conscious self-torture in the name of a higher goal. However, the reality of the desert turned out to be much more prosaic and harsh than he could have imagined. Spiritual practices did not override physiology. His body began to send alarm signals. Constant thirst became not just discomfort, but the main thought, crowding out all others. He began to actively search for sources of food, using what little knowledge he had. He found what the local Aborigines called desert raisins, small, shriveled berries. He ate the flowers and leaves of unknown shrubs, risking poisoning, but intuitively choosing what seemed edible. It was a desperate diet that provided no energy but allowed him to fool his stomach. He spent more calories searching for this food than he got from it. His body began to go into survival mode, burning its own muscle tissue. The internal struggle during this period was enormous. One part of him was still a mystic seeking enlightenment. The other part, an experienced firefighter and survivalist, screamed that he was making a fatal mistake. This internal conflict was perhaps more frightening than the external conditions. He began to see mirages. The desert played with his mind, showing him lakes where there was only scorching salt. These visions were both painful and part of the mystical experience he had come for. He learned to conserve energy, almost like a reptile. During the day, he would find the slightest shelter, often simply burrowing into the sand under a bush to avoid the direct sun. He only moved in the early morning and late evening, when the heat subsided. Each day he lived was a small victory, but with each victory, he grew weaker. He was not yet afraid. He was completely absorbed in his experiment. He wanted to see what would happen next when he crossed the line. This overconfidence was his biggest mistake. He underestimated the desert and overestimated his own strength. What he thought was a spiritual test was just a slow process of fading away. He was still alive, but time was working against him. Like this, if you also think this story is on the edge of insanity and incredible willpower. Guess what happened next when the world finally realized he was gone? In the civilized world, thousands of miles away from the scorching desert, people started to get worried. Robert Bogucki hadn't been in touch by the agreed time. His family in America and friends in Australia raised the alarm. The Western Australian authorities responded immediately. An initial aerial search quickly yielded results. First, his abandoned pickup truck was found on the edge of the desert. Then, dozens of kilometers away, pilots spotted a lone bicycle lying in the sand. It became clear that Bogucki had gone into the desert on foot. One of the largest and most expensive search operations in the state's history began. Planes and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras took to the skies. Four-wheel drive vehicles with teams of police and volunteers were sent to the ground. Realizing that they were dealing with a unique terrain, the authorities brought in the best specialists. Elite fighters from the Special Air Service, SAS, trained to survive in extreme conditions, participated in the search. But the main trump card was the trackers from among the local Aborigines. These people were born in the desert and could read it like an open book. They could spot a barely discernible trail where a European would see nothing. It was they who found the first footprints of Robert's boots, leading from his abandoned bicycle deep into the continent. The trackers followed the trail for several days. It was exhausting work. They saw where he had stopped, where he had tried to dig for water. But the further they went, the stranger his route became. The tracks were chaotic. He did not walk in one direction, as most lost people do, trying to reach a road or civilization. He zigzagged, walked in circles, and sometimes, as it seemed to the trackers, deliberately tried to confuse the tracks by walking on rocks. This puzzled the rescuers. A theory emerged that he did not want to be found. Perhaps he was so absorbed in his mission that he was actively avoiding the search parties. This made their job almost impossible. Despite this, the search continued with growing desperation. The rescuers understood that time was running out. If not by the hour, then by the day. The chances of finding him alive dwindled with each scorching sunrise. Millions of dollars were spent to find one man in a vast ocean of sand. Search teams combed the desert, but what was Robert himself doing to stay alive? In the next chapter, we learn about the unique and desperate survival techniques he used while the whole world was trying to find him. While rescuers combed hundreds of square kilometers, Robert Bogucki was fighting his own battle. His main and only enemy was thirst. In the Great Sand Desert, survival depends entirely on the ability to find water, and Bogucki had to quickly master this skill. He had no modern filters or drilling tools. His only tool was his powers of observation, sharpened by desperation. He intuitively understood that water, if it existed, must accumulate in certain places. His salvation came in the form of so-called nama, natural depressions in rock outcrops. These stone bowls, carved out by thousands of years of erosion, collected rainwater during rare downpours. Finding such a place was incredible luck, a real miracle. When he found such a rock lake, it was a feast. The water was often old, stagnant, and full of organic matter. But for him, it was the elixir of life. He drank, filled his few containers and could stay at this source for several days, regaining his strength. But such sources were extremely rare. He spent most of his time in a painful search. He learned to look for dry stream beds. He understood that even if there was sand on the surface, moisture could remain underneath at the clay level. He dug the sand with his hands at the lowest points of the stream bed until his fingers hit cool, wet mud. It wasn't water, but thick sludge, but he squeezed precious drops of moisture out of it. This dirty, murky water hardly quenched his thirst, but it allowed him to hold out for another day. Each sip was a victory over death. He learned to appreciate what in normal life he would not even have considered drinkable. His whole life had turned into an endless cycle. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, he walked. He looked for rocks, looked for riverbeds, looked for any signs of life. During the day, he hid from the heat, conserving every ounce of moisture in his body. His body adapted. He fell into a state close to suspended animation. His metabolism slowed to a crawl. He became part of this desert, a living creature that had learned to survive on its meager gifts. These skills, acquired out of desperation, allowed him to hold out for weeks. He drank water from rocks and ate flowers from thorny bushes. He was alive, but he was on the edge, and he didn't know that the world had almost given up on him. Want to know the secret that became the most terrifying moment in this story? After weeks of fruitless searching, the Western Australian authorities faced a harsh reality. Robert Bogucki's trail had been lost for good. He was nowhere to be seen, either on the ground or from the air. Each day of the operation cost the Treasury a huge amount of money, and there was no chance of success. Survival experts and doctors gave their verdict. By all accounts, a person without water or food supplies could not have survived so long in such extreme conditions. It was officially announced that the chances of finding Bogucki alive were zero. He had been in the desert for over a month. At the end of August 1998, a difficult but logistically inevitable decision was made. The official search and rescue operation was called off. The planes returned to their bases and the ground teams left the desert. Robert Bogucki was officially declared missing, which in these circumstances meant dead. For his family in the United States, it was a tragedy. They refused to believe that Robert was dead. His sister begged the Australian authorities not to stop searching, believing that her brother, with his experience and willpower, could still be alive. But the arguments were compelling. Resources had been exhausted. Continuing the search meant wasting money and risking the lives of rescuers in a dangerous region. The desert had won. The world accepted the loss of yet another adventurer. Now Robert Bogucki was truly alone. Before, without even knowing it, he had been the focus of dozens of people. Now for hundreds of kilometers around, there was no one looking for him. He had been crossed off the list of the living. The news spread around the world. Newspaper headlines told of the tragic fate of an American who had perished in the Australian wilderness. The story seemed to be over. All that remained was to wait for years until a chance traveler stumbled upon his remains. It was at this moment, when he was left to die, that the most incredible stage of his survival began. He was alone against an entire continent. He had no food, no water, no hope of rescue. He did not know that the search had been called off. He simply continued to do what he did every day. He tried to survive another day. He fought for his life, even when the rest of the world had already given up on him. But what happens to a person when they realize that no one is looking for them anymore? We will explore this in the next chapter, where we will delve into the psychological state of a person left alone with eternity. By the 40th day in the desert, Robert Bogucki had become a shadow of his former self. His body was exhausted to the limit. He had lost more than 30 kilograms. Every step was incredibly difficult. Every movement was met with weakness. His spiritual mission had long since faded into the background, replaced by a single, all-consuming thought: to survive. Now it was no longer philosophy, but pure physiology. His body was in a state of extreme stress, functioning on its last reserves of energy. His psychological state was no less severe. Long days of absolute silence and loneliness were driving him mad. He had not heard human speech for over a month. The only sounds were the rustling of the wind and the beating of his own heart. He later said that he fell into a state similar to deep meditation. The boundaries between sleep and wakefulness, between reality and hallucinations, began to blur. The desert seemed to come alive, talking to him, showing him visions. He was on the very edge of human experience. What he had perhaps gone to the desert to find came to him, but in its most frightening form. He was no longer just a human being, but part of the landscape, as much a survivor as a withered bush or a lizard. Despair was replaced by moments of strange euphoria. He felt complete unity with the world, but at the same time he realized that he was dying. This duality kept him in constant tension. He continued his ritual, searching for water, searching for edible plants, resting in the shade. He found a few dried figs that gave him a few grains of sugar. He ate leaves that were bitter, but provided at least some moisture. His endurance was remarkable. A former firefighter, he knew how the body reacts to stress, but even his experience could not prepare him for such a prolonged ordeal. He was living contrary to all laws of medicine and logic. At some point after the 40th day, an irreversible shift occurred in Robert's mind. The spiritual seeker who wanted to dissolve into the desert finally gave way to a man who desperately wanted to return to life. The experiment was over. He realized that if he didn't do something himself, he would die here. This change gave him a new burst of energy. It was no longer the energy with which he had begun his journey, but the cold, calculated determination of a survivor. He stopped wandering aimlessly. He needed a plan. He understood that no one was looking for him in this wilderness. He needed to get to a more open space where he could be spotted from the air if a plane happened to fly by. He began to move toward a large open salt marsh that he had noticed a few days earlier. The trek took the last of his strength. He walked for several days, falling and getting up again. He crawled to this open space, a huge white pan of a dried-up lake. Here he could be seen from a great distance. Now he had to send a signal. He had no flare gun or signal fire. He only had his belongings. He took his blue sleeping bag and yellow tarp and spread them out on the white surface of the salt flat, creating a bright spot of color. He lay on the scorching salt. He was completely exhausted. He had made his last move in this game against the desert. Now all he could do was wait for rescue or death. He was ready for either outcome. He had gone all the way. He was at peace with himself, but still clinging to the thin thread of life. He lay there under the merciless Australian sun, living proof of man's incredible resilience. He had lasted 43 days, and it was at this moment, when there was almost no hope left, that a miracle happened. Although the official search had long since ended, the story of Robert Bogucki continued to haunt journalists. It was too high-profile a tragedy. The editors of Australia's Channel 9 decided to film a final report, a kind of epitaph, to show from the air the place where the American had disappeared. They hired a helicopter and flew to the area where Robert's bicycle had been found. Their task was to film the endless, frightening desert to illustrate the futility of the search. They flew over the scorched earth, commenting that no human being could survive in this hell. The pilot and cameraman Mike Flynn were about to return when Flynn suddenly noticed something below. Against the backdrop of the white salt flats, there was a bright spot that could not be a natural formation. It was something blue and yellow. The helicopter descended. They approached and couldn't believe their eyes. On the ground next to a blue sleeping bag lay a man. He was emaciated, but he was alive. He waved weakly at them. It was Robert Bogucki. It was September 23rd, 1998, the 43rd day of his stay in the desert. He had been found. The helicopter crew was in shock. They landed next to this living ghost. They were journalists who had come to film a story about death, but instead became rescuers. They gave him water, his first sip of clean water in a month and a half. Robert was barely conscious. He was dehydrated, emaciated, his skin burned by the sun, but he smiled. He whispered his first words to the people who brought him back to life. The news of his rescue exploded across the world's news agencies. It was incredible. The man who had been written off, who had been officially left for dead, had been found alive. It was like a biblical story that had come to life. A helicopter immediately took him to a hospital in Broome. The doctors who were waiting to see him were prepared for the worst. But what they discovered amazed them no less than it did the rescuers themselves.
Can you hear me?
You did it, son.
You came back to us.
BP is 60/40. Get me a liter of saline stat.
EKG shows sinus touch. IV access.
As soon as Robert Bogucki arrived at the hospital, the doctors immediately began to examine him. Their surprise knew no bounds. Despite 43 days without normal food and water, his vital organs were functioning. He suffered from severe dehydration and exhaustion, but his body had endured. He lost almost 40% of his weight, becoming a living skeleton. But his will to live and, perhaps, his experience as a firefighter who knew the limits of his body allowed him not to cross the line beyond which irreversible damage begins. He had a long recovery ahead of him. While he was recovering, the world around him was in turmoil. He became a global sensation, a hero who survived against all odds, a man who proved that there are no limits to endurance. His family cried with happiness as they flew to Australia to see him. But very soon, the euphoria of the miraculous rescue gave way to uncomfortable questions. When the details of his pilgrimage became known, public opinion was divided. The miracle turned into a scandal.
What exactly happened during the disappearance?
Many Australians were outraged. Millions of taxpayer dollars had been spent searching for this man. Hundreds of people had been involved, risking their lives in the dangerous desert. And all this so that one man could satisfy his spiritual quest. He was accused of selfishness, recklessness, and disrespect for those who rescued him. He was not a victim. He created this situation himself. Debates about whether he was a hero or an irresponsible fool continued for several months. Robert Bogucki himself was taciturn. He recovered and returned to the United States. He did not seek fame or try to capitalize on his story. He quietly stated that he had gained the experience he was seeking, although he admitted that things did not go entirely according to plan.
But once I did,
He claimed that during his ordeal, he had indeed found what he was looking for. He had been baptized by the desert and emerged a changed man. He had found his God in the silence and emptiness. Robert Bogucki's story is a classic example of historical adventure survival taken to the extreme. This is not a shipwreck or a military operation. It is the conscious choice of one man who decided to challenge nature itself and his own limits. His 43-day odyssey is a hymn to human resilience, and at the same time a stark warning about the consequences of hubris. He used methods that were absurd from the point of view of civilization, eating plants and squeezing moisture out of mud, but it was these methods that saved his life. The price of his victory was enormous, both for himself and for society. He survived, but the debate over whether his spiritual quest was worth such risks continues to this day. Do you think Robert Bogucki's actions were a manifestation of supreme spiritual courage or an extreme form of selfishness? Suggest topics for future videos about incredible survival stories that you would like to see in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.